Welcome to This Day in His Story, created by American Heritage Worldwide. A reminder that every day holds something new to learn. Did you know that before stamps existed, people took letters to the post office where the cost of the postage was written on the corner of the package or envelope? Learn how postage rates were once based, not only on distance, but also on how many sheets of paper were inside the letter. Learn that more than 5,000 different U.S. stamp designs have been created, making stamp collecting one of the world's most popular hobbies. Discover that a person who collects or loves stamps is called a philatelist.
So imagine you need to get across town, right? You hail a taxi, you jump in, but you immediately notice there's no meter on the dashboard.
Which is already a red flag.
Right, massive red flag. So the driver takes a look at how heavy your bags are, asks where you're going, and just he makes up this complicated fare completely on the spot in his head.
A total guessing game.
Exactly. But here is the real kicker. The driver doesn't ask you for a single dime. Instead, he drives you all the way there, and when you arrive, he forces the friend you're visiting to pay for the ride.
And if your friend just isn't home, or, refuses to pay.
Yeah, the driver just simply eats the entire cost of the trip and drives away empty-handed. I mean, that absolute chaos, that was the literal reality of the United States postal system before 1847.
It sounds like a surreal thought experiment, honestly. But yeah, that was the literal everyday mechanism of human communication back then.
Yeah.
I mean, the whole system was just teetering on the edge of collapse.
Because the fundamental economics were totally backwards.
Completely backwards.
Well, welcome back to a new deep dive. We are thrilled to have you with us today as we explore an object that, honestly, you probably have sitting in a junk drawer right now. We are talking about the United States postage stamp.
A true everyday object.
Yeah, and our mission today is to explore how a tiny sticky piece of paper actually managed to solve that chaotic economic crisis we just described, and how it eventually transformed into this miniature canvas reflecting American history and art.
It's really the ultimate example of hiding in plain sight. I mean, since 1847, the United States has issued over 4,000 different stamps.
Wow, 4,000.
Yeah, featuring more than 800 individuals. And what began strictly as this very utilitarian receipt of payment just completely revolutionized how we share information. And then, almost by accident, it evolved into one of the world's most popular hobbies.
Yeah, okay, so let's unpack the mechanics of that evolution. Because that pre-stamp era we touched on in the taxi analogy, it wasn't just inconvenient. Looking through our sources for today, it sounds like an absolute logistical nightmare.
Oh, it was a system absolutely crippled by friction at every single touch point. First off, there's no such thing as dropping a letter in a blue mailbox on your corner. That didn't exist.
You couldn't just walk outside.
No. Sending a letter meant a physical trip to the local post office where you had to hand your envelope directly to the postmaster.
And because there was no standardized national rate, this postmaster essentially had to do complex algebra just to figure out what the service should cost.
Precisely. The postmaster would take your letter, dip a pen in ink, and actually handwrite the postage amount in the upper right-hand corner of the envelope.
That is so wild to picture.
And that calculation was based on two highly variable factors. First, they actually counted the physical number of sheets of paper inside the letter.
Oh, so not just weight, the actual number of pages.
Right, the sheets. And then they had to calculate the exact distance that letter had to travel to reach its destination.
Wait, so if the recipient had to pay, which we established, what happened if, say, I mailed a multi-page letter from Boston all the way to Philadelphia, and the person I sent it to just flat out refused to accept it? Did the postman really just walk away empty-handed after transporting it hundreds of miles?
That was the fatal flaw of the entire system. If the recipient refused to pay, or, just couldn't afford it, the letter was designated as a dead letter.
A dead letter.
Yeah. And the post office simply had to absorb the entire cost of transporting it all that way. I mean, they absorbed the labor, the logistics, the wear and tear on the horses and carriages.
That is insane.
It was a massive financial drain. It made the postal service completely unsustainable.
Because the economics of that are just disastrous. You're basically running a massive national delivery business where the revenue is entirely optional upon delivery.
Exactly.
So obviously, Congress finally steps in to stop the bleeding. On March 3rd, 1847, they authorized the use of U.S. postage stamps.
Right. And just a few months later, July 1st, 1847, the very first general issue drops in New York City. The public is introduced to just two options.
Keep it simple.
Exactly. A 5-cent Benjamin Franklin stamp and a 5-cent George Washington stamp.
But the physical reality of buying those first stamps in 1847, it was still incredibly clunky compared to the streamlined process we know today. Like, we take those little perforated edges for granted, but those didn't exist yet, right?
Oh, they definitely did not.
Yeah.
These early stamps were printed on pre-gummed, non-perforated sheets.
Okay.
So when you walked into the post office to buy one, the postal clerks actually had to pull out a pair of scissors and manually cut the individual stamps from the sheet for every single customer.
Okay, literally just clerks snipping out little squares of paper all day long.
Snip, snip, snip.
Yep.
All day.
That sounds tedious. But even with the scissors, this invention fundamentally changed the psychology of mail, didn't it? Because it forced a complete reversal of that terrible financial model. Postage was finally paid in advance.
It was a profound shift in trust, really, and in responsibility. By moving to a prepay model, the stamp acted as this guaranteed tangible receipt.
Right.
When you stuck that 5-cent Benjamin Franklin on your envelope, you were telling the Postal Service, hey, the service has been fully funded. You can safely transport this without any financial risk.
Which is huge for them.
Massive. And for you, the consumer, it completely democratized communication. You knew exactly what it cost up front, you paid it, and the transaction was done. It removed all that friction and the financial jeopardy from the entire national network.
And because everyday people enthusiastically embraced this new upfront payment model, the volume of mail just exploded.
Absolutely skyrocketed.
But that explosion meant the post office suddenly had to innovate the physical format of the stamps, right? They had to keep up with how businesses and everyday citizens actually wanted to use them in the real world.
Form had to follow function. I mean, the manual scissor cutting was charming for a few years, but it quickly became an industrial bottleneck.
I can imagine the lines.
Oh, yeah. So the format of the stamp had to evolve rapidly to meet specific practical demands. For example, by April 16, 1900, the post office realized people hated carrying loose, sticky sheets of paper that would get ruined in their pockets.
Oh, yeah. They just stick to everything.
Right. So they issued the first books of stamps, which contained 12, 24, or 48 2-cent stamps bound together.
Okay, that solves the problem for, the everyday person buying a dozen stamps. But what about commerce? Because if I am running a massive mail order catalog in the early 20th century, I am not buying little booklets. I need industrial scale solutions.
Which leads directly to the big innovation of 1908. Responding directly to pressure from large businesses, the post office introduced the first roll of stamps.
Okay, but why does a roll matter so much more than just, say, a really large flat sheet?
Because a roll can be fed into a machine.
Oh.
Automation.
Exactly. A flat sheet requires human hands to peel and place every single stamp, but a continuous roll of thousands of stamps. That allows businesses to automate the process of affixing postage to mass mailings. That makes total sense.
Standardizing the format into rolls was honestly just as revolutionary for the economy as the invention of the stamp itself. It turned the stamp from a simple retail item into an essential piece of industrial machinery.
And the chemical and mechanical innovations just kept coming from there. I mean, we eventually get self-adhesive stamps in the 1960s.
Thankfully.
Yeah, completely eliminating the need to lick that terrible, bitter glue. But looking at the timeline, the absolute masterstroke in postal economics happened way later, on April 12, 2007. That is when the USPS introduced the Forever Stamp.
Ah, yes. The Forever Stamp is just a fascinating piece of financial engineering. It's a stamp that guarantees the movement of one piece of first-class mail, regardless of any future price increases.
I always call the original Forever Stamp the ultimate inflation hedge, because think about it. An original Forever Stamp purchased back in 2007 cost just 41 cents.
Right.
If you found one of those original 2007 stamps in your desk today, you could just slap it on an envelope and mail a letter, even though the current postage rate is significantly higher.
It totally insulates the consumer from the annoyance of a price hike. You never have to go back to the post office to buy a tiny, 1 cent or 2 cent stamp just to make up the difference when rates change.
Now, I have to push back on this from the perspective of the Postal Service. Sure, it is incredibly convenient for me as a consumer, but isn't that a terrible business model for a postal service that, let's be honest, famously struggles with revenue?
It seems that way, yeah.
Like, they are literally eating the cost of 2 decades of inflation. They are honoring a 41-cent payment for a service that costs way more to execute today.
It definitely seems counterintuitive until you look at the cash flow.
Okay, explain that.
The Forever Stamp relies on the financial concept of the float. When you buy a sheet of Forever Stamps, you are giving the Postal Service cash today for a service they might not have to render for months, years, or even decades.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, they get an immediate infusion of capital. Furthermore, millions of these stamps are purchased, lost in junk drawers, or collected, meaning the Postal Service gets the revenue, but never actually has to perform the delivery service at all.
That is brilliant.
It was a brilliant way to generate immediate, massive cash reserves while banking on human forgetfulness.
That makes perfect sense. They trade a fraction of a cent in future inflation for hard currency today. So, okay, we've optimized the utility. We have rolls feeding into automated machines. We have self-adhesive chemistry. We have brilliant economic hedges like the float. But as the physical mechanics were perfected, the post office realized they had accidentally created millions of tiny blank billboards.
Yes, exactly.
And that realization sparked a completely different kind of revolution.
This is the exact moment the stamp transitions from pure logistics to cultural real estate. In the early decades, the visual language of the stamp was strictly utilitarian and incredibly restrictive. The Founding Fathers essentially had a monopoly on the imagery. Benjamin Franklin and George Washington were literally the only faces used until 1856.
That's almost a decade of just two guys. And then in 1856, they finally issue a 5-cent stamp featuring Thomas Jefferson.
Right, followed by Andrew Jackson on a 2-cent stamp in 1863.
And honestly, the legacy of those early days holds true even now. Over time, George Washington has appeared on more U.S. postage stamps than any other person in history.
Really? Washington holds the record?
Yep. The visual message the government was sending was purely about establishing authority, stability, and the bedrock history of the young nation.
But the real seismic shift in how we view stamps happened in 1893. This is when the post office decided to issue the first U.S. commemorative stamps for the World Columbian Exposition in Chicago. And they immediately ran into a very physical manufacturing problem.
Yeah, they wanted to use the stamps to feature these elaborate paintings of Christopher Columbus's voyages to the New World. But the standard-size stamps that everyone was used to were practically microscopic for that. Because of the printing technology of the time, right? Like, they couldn't just scale it down.
Exactly. They were using 19th century engraving techniques. If you try to shrink a massive, detailed historical painting featuring multiple ships, ocean waves, dozens of figures down to a 1-inch square,
It's just a blur.
the ink bleeds. The image turns into an unrecognizable smudge. They physically could not render the art at that utilitarian scale.
So they basically had to expand the dimensions of the billboard because the font was too small to read from the highway. They created massive, nearly double-sized stamps just to fit the artwork.
And that physical expansion changed everything. I mean, think about it. When a government deliberately doubles the size of a functional receipt strictly to accommodate a painting, they are announcing a major shift in purpose.
Yeah, it's not just a receipt anymore.
Exactly. Its primary function is now commemoration. It actually invites you to stop, look, and reflect on a narrative before you drop the letter in the box.
And once stamps became a dedicated, permanent space for honoring history and events, the question of who actually gets to be on a stamp became fiercely contested. The timeline of who appears on these tiny squares of paper serves as a fascinating permanent record of shifting cultural recognition.
It acts as a mirror of society, albeit a heavily filtered one. There is a very strict tradition that guides this process even today. Almost everyone featured on a U.S. stamp is deceased.
Which is a very pragmatic rule, honestly. It prevents the institution from honoring a living person who might, go on to do something terrible later in life, forcing a massive, embarrassing recall.
Exactly.
It keeps the legacy secure.
It ensures that only those with a finalized, historically settled legacy are considered. But looking at the timeline of the firsts on these stamps tells you a great deal about who the institutions were acknowledging at different points in time.
Definitely.
For instance, the first woman to ever appear on a U.S. postage stamp was included in that oversized 1893 Columbian Exposition set. It was Queen Isabella of Spain.
Honored specifically as the patroness who funded Columbus's voyages.
Right.
I have always found a deep irony there. The very first woman to appear on a United States stamp wasn't an American citizen, an American pioneer, or an American leader. She was a 15th century Spanish monarch.
It really highlights just how rigidly tethered those early commemorative stamps were to the traditional European discovery narrative.
Right.
It actually wasn't until 1902 that Martha Washington broke through as the first American woman to be honored on a stamp.
And as the 20th century progresses, the timeline slowly expands. In 1907, Pocahontas became the first Native American featured. But then it took all the way until 1940 for Booker T. Washington to become the first African American honored on a U.S. stamp. I want to dig into that lag for a second. A government doesn't just wake up one morning and decide to print a new face. How do these stamps serve as a lagging indicator of who society deems worthy of respect?
You really have to consider the bureaucratic machinery involved. The post office doesn't act on a whim. The selection process involves advisory committees, historical reviews, and a need for broad societal consensus.
So it's a whole ordeal.
Very much so. When a government finally puts a face on its currency or its postage, it is conferring the absolute highest level of institutional legitimacy. It's a permanent, physical declaration that this person's contribution is integral to the national identity.
That carries a lot of weight.
It does.
Yeah.
And the decades-long lag it took to represent women and people of color reflects the grueling, real-world historical struggles those groups faced just to be recognized in society itself. The stamps rarely lead the cultural shift. They codify the shift after the battle for recognition has already been fought and won.
Wow. They are the ultimate historical receipt. They prove what society was finally ready to see. And this desire to commemorate didn't just stop at individual people either. It extended to major human achievements. I mean, the creative and manufacturing peak of this concept happened in 1969, with the stamps honoring the moon landing.
Oh, the 1969 moon landing stamps are an absolute masterpiece of thematic design and chemical engineering. The post office didn't just print a picture of an astronaut on standard paper. They actually printed the stamps on a specialized metallic chrome foil.
Because they wanted the physical stamp to mimic the visual aesthetic of the NASA spacesuits worn by the astronauts.
That is just incredible to me.
Yeah.
You aren't just looking at a flat image of the moon landing. The material itself brings a physical weight to the commemoration. You are literally holding a piece of the space age aesthetic in the palm of your hand.
And that specific feeling, that really powerful human desire to hold a tactile piece of history in your hand, is exactly what spawned an entirely new global subculture.
Right.
Because these stamps evolved from messy, handwritten receipts into beautiful, tangible markers of history, they birthed one of the world's most popular hobbies, the study and collection of stamps, known as philately. Philately. Practiced by philatelists. It is just a great word. But I want to push back on the cultural perception of the hobby today. I think if you ask the average person on the street, there is a lingering stereotype that stamp collecting is just this dusty, solitary pursuit for retirees sitting in dimly lit rooms.
Right. That's the cliche.
But the data in our sources tells a completely different, highly dynamic story.
The data absolutely defies the stereotype. It's true that philately was a cultural juggernaut in the mid-20th century. At its peak, the hobby was so ubiquitous that 1 in 7 families owned a stamp collection.
1 in 7, that's huge.
It was viewed as an essential educational tool for children to learn geography and history. And it is also true that today, roughly 80% of established stamp collectors are over the age of 60.
Okay, so the stereotype isn't entirely baseless.
No, not entirely. However, there is a fascinating demographic earthquake happening right beneath the surface.
And that earthquake happened during the COVID-19 pandemic. The hobby saw a massive, completely unexpected surge in global popularity.
It did. And the most striking part of that surge is the demographic breakdown. According to the current data, half of all new stamp collectors entering the hobby right now are women and children.
Half. That is a massive demographic pivot for an industry that, frankly, many assumed was slowly fading away.
It's a total revitalization.
So we have to ask why. Why did a highly tactile historical object see such a sudden, intense surge in appeal during a global pandemic where we were all isolated, working on laptops and living completely digital lives?
The answer lies in the friction of the physical world. During the pandemic, almost all of our daily interactions were reduced to frictionless pixels on a screen. Work, school, socializing, it all happened through a sheet of glass.
Yeah, Zoom fatigue was real.
Exactly. And in a frictionless, hyper-digital environment, the human brain begins to actively crave texture. We crave tangibility.
You know, it makes me think of the completely unexpected modern resurgence of vinyl records. We have access to literally every song ever recorded in human history on our phones, streaming digitally and perfectly, and yet people are spending huge amounts of money on heavy vinyl.
They want the large cardboard artwork.
Right. They want the physical act of sliding the record out of the sleeve and placing the needle in the groove. They want the ritual. Stamps seem to serve that exact same psychological need.
It is the exact same mechanism. Stamps allow us to literally hold history. They are miniature, curated artifacts. When you take the time to find a stamp celebrating a specific historical event or, a person whose contributions resonate with you, and you physically place that stamp into an album, you are engaging in a tactile ritual of respect.
That's a great way to put it.
You are building and curating your own tiny physical museum in a world that feels increasingly fleeting and virtual.
You're curating a physical anchor to the real world. Okay, as we start to wrap up this deep dive, let's synthesize the incredible journey of this everyday object.
If we look at the entire arc, we started in a chaotic system of postmasters, scribbling arbitrary prices on envelopes, a system that was financially destroying itself because recipients simply refused to pay.
The taxi driver eating the costs.
Exactly. We moved through the manual scissor-cut squares of 1847 that revolutionized communication by forcing prepayment. We saw the consumer-driven innovations of books and rolls that allowed businesses to automate commerce, and the brilliant economic cash flow engine that is the forever stamp.
The ultimate float.
Yep. Then we watched the physical dimensions of the stamp literally expand to accommodate the Columbus paintings, transforming the object from a receipt into a massive commemorative canvas. We saw that canvas act as a lagging but permanent mirror of our changing society, from Queen Isabella to Booker T. Washington, and finally we saw it culminate in chrome foil moon landings and a booming pandemic-era hobby resurgence that is bringing women and children back to the physical artifact.
It is an unbelievable evolution for something that literally costs less than a cup of coffee. We started this conversation by talking about how we usually look for massive marble statues, giant murals, and towering architecture to find history. We assume scale equals importance. But we've seen today that sometimes the most profound reflections of who we are as a society, who we value, how we innovate, and what we choose to remember are printed on a tiny, sticky square of paper hiding right in our junk drawers.
It's a perfect reminder that lasting cultural significance isn't about physical scale at all. It's entirely about the meaning we choose to attach to the object.
Absolutely. So we want to leave you with a final two-part thought experiment to mull over on your own today. Based on everything we've talked about regarding the strict rules of who gets honored and why, if you were in charge of the selection committee and you could put anyone's face on a U.S. postage stamp right now, someone who hasn't been featured yet, who would it be and what exactly did they do to earn that ultimate institutional recognition? And second, as our society moves further and further into an increasingly frictionless, fully digital future, will we ever invent a purely digital medium that carries that exact same profound physical weight and cultural immortality as being printed on a tiny, sticky piece of paper? Something to think about.
Thank you for joining us for this day in His story. May the lessons of yesterday inspire you to see God's hand today and to play your part in His story now. For more faith-based learning, visit ahsworldwide.org, the homeschool for faith and family.